Okay. All right, I'd like to call this meeting to order. This is the Major Crash Review Task Force, and we're meeting at 2:37 p.m. on Wednesday, July 29th, 2020. We're meeting remotely via Microsoft Teams. Looking at who is on the call, we have a quorum with 4 of our 6 voting members present right now. We expect members from MPD and possibly the Bicycle Advisory Council to join later. And we won't be going into a closed session today, but we will do some roll call votes because we have minutes to approve. So we can start with that actually. So has everyone reviewed the 3 minutes I circulated beforehand? One was the corrected version of the April 29th, 2020 meeting minutes. And then there were also meeting minutes from May 27th and June 24th. Everyone get it with those?
I did. Eileen did.
Okay, not hearing that anyone has not reviewed them. So we can do a roll call vote to, is there a motion to approve those 3 sets of minutes?
I will move to approve the 3 sets of minutes. This is Eileen.
Anyone?
Seconded.
Okay. So let's do a roll call vote to approve those minutes. DDOT, Linda Bailey.
Approve.
Office of Planning, Kristen Calkins.
Approve.
Pedestrian Advisory Council, Eileen McCarthy.
Approve.
And Multimodal Accessibility Advisory Council, Helen Urquhart.
Approve.
Did any other voting members join the call? No, so those minutes are approved. So yeah, I think everyone saw the agenda we circulated beforehand. So we'll be quickly asking if there's any outstanding questions from what we heard last month from DDOT and Bega. Then we'll discuss the some things about the annual report, and we'll have a presentation from DDOT on serious injury data. But before we get into those things, is there any new business anyone wants to bring up?
I have a question.
Go for it.
I seem to have something from you all saying that this is 6:24, and you open it up and it's still 5:27. In the so I'm wondering if I missed something.
Check.
Yeah, Vision Zero Magicraft, May 27th, and there's no June 24th.
Huh. Anybody else find that? You're saying the one that is labeled May 27th, or the one that's labeled June 24th is actually May 27th?
Yeah, it's sort of described as, look at it, it's not.
I'm double checking what I've got.
You're right.
Oh yeah, it is. That tells you how much attention we've been paying. I did, and I actually read them all.
Is it
I
the
did too, and I woke up from a good nap, so because I think the last time we met, we had a discussion of some of the rules, basically for RVing. We didn't discuss any of the crashes. We discussed the rules about,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it looks
and
like...
you know what? It's just the date that's wrong.
Right. Yeah.
I think everybody the same. I think the people there were the same people that were.
Yeah, I think it's just the date at the top of the minutes and how the file is labeled, but the rest of it looks correct. Well, I will have to correct those and redistribute them, and we can vote on that correction as well. Sorry about that.
I wouldn't worry about this. There wasn't
Thanks.
anything on it, really. I mean, it was just because we just discussed the, what the rules were about, which cases we discussed and whether it was appropriate or not.
Right.
We didn't. That was what I remember.
Hey, Jonathan, I'm here on mute if you need me for anything.
Okay, thanks, Terry. We were just noting that I can correct the date on the June minutes. Okay, thanks for catching that, Helen.
You're welcome. I just hope we didn't miss anything else, that's all.
No, that should be it. And like you said, the minutes were pretty short from June because there was no crash review, and we just went over the guidance we heard from Glenn Dubin at DDOT's General Counsel's office, and then Johnny Barton from BEGA's Office of Open Government. And so that's actually the next item on this agenda. If anyone has any questions, if there's still any confusion or anything like that, based on what we heard last month.
I don't think I have any questions right now, but I just did want to note that our counsel's office was going to give us a memo on a couple of questions that had come up, but I'm still unfortunately waiting on that, and can certainly let you know what anyway, what comes out of that.
Yeah, that's good. That was my only question, that I hadn't heard anything about the question he said he was going to research.
Yeah, so I think they're close, but not quite finalized.
Yeah. There's no rush. I just would prefer it didn't get lost.
Yes, agreed.
Okay, that's good. I'm glad we got some clarity on those issues. The next agenda item is to talk about our annual report, and I sent a link around to the 2018 annual report. So let's have that discussion.
Great. Yeah, I think I was going to walk everybody through the findings and the recommendations from the previous report, because one of our theories about this report is that we'll build on last year's findings. And I unfortunately haven't had time to double check all these numbers, but I did have our contractor run 3 years of FARS data, which I know, Terry, you all know pretty inside out as well. And so what they pulled from FARS is just from the public side of all that. But I thought I'd do that just to give us a sense of, because we're only able to look at cases as they're closed, like are these trends like definitely following for the whole set of fatalities we're looking at in the district for these timeframes, or not, basically. Oh, wait. Let me get you guys on here. Okay. Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. I'm just going to view it this way. Let me know if you're having trouble seeing it. I can make it a little larger, but I'm going to keep it with the sidebar if it's okay. So this is an overview I made last year, so based on our previous one. And then I noted the FARS findings. Like I said, we just kind of pulled those, but this is the first look at it. And I've noted kind of in colors. Blue means we're pretty close to the FARS number. Yellow is a little farther away, and then red is pretty far away. And again, I think part of this is just which crashes get closed quickly, but I think I would like, once we've kind of gone over these numbers and confirmed all of them, I'd like to include them in this year's report just as a background, and overall like to have a little more statistics added as well as the individual crashes we reviewed, because I think that'll add a little depth to the findings in the report. So just to walk through them, the very first one we had was that 72% of crashes occurred on multi-lane roadways after sunset when streets are less likely to have heavy traffic. So that 72% or 13 of the crashes reviewed is fairly similar to the FAR's 3-year total, which was 81% of all fatal crashes. So I think that's pretty much in keeping, less than 10 percentage points away. The second finding was related specifically to speed as a contributing factor. We had noted the contributing factor in 56% of the crashes that we reviewed. FARS only has it noted for 38%. And again, these are all from the same sources. So Terry, if you or any of your colleagues have comments on how FARS is similar to or differs from the way we've been talking about crashes, happy to discuss it. It's kind of in the similar range, but definitely a different total value. The third finding was impairment was a contributing factor in 9 of the crashes we reviewed for last year's report, or 50%. In the FARS recording, we only have 34% over the 3-year period. 8 crashes involved drivers or motorcyclists traveling without a valid license or endorsement for a motorcycle and or who had problematic driving histories. FARS is only showing 19%. I'm pretty sure that is only this valid license or endorsement. I don't think FARS has anything about problematic driving histories, so I think this is just the licensure question. So that's pretty different, and again, that may have to do with crashes that closed quickly. And then this is 12 crashes reviewed by the task force had at least 3 of the first 4 findings, and FARS had only 31%, so that was pretty far off. But it may have to do with especially some of these numbers that are a little lower in the 3-year total. Finding number 6 is about the limitations about crashes. That obviously we didn't run anything different on it. Finding number 8 is, or 7, sorry, is that there are 8 of the crashes we reviewed, which is 44%, were single vehicle crashes. And only 19% of the 3-year total of fatalities actually were single vehicle crashes, which I think, again, speaks to probably what cases close quickly. And the final finding, number 8, is that 28% of the crashes that were reviewed involved persons walking or biking who were also over the age of 50. And that's pretty similar to what FARS is finding, that the pedestrians and cyclists over the age of 50 represented 24% of those fatalities. Does anybody have any questions or comments about those, or thoughts about other findings that seem to have emerged this year?
It's Eileen. I'll just add that I'm still, I haven't progressed very far on the report, but for the first 2 findings, what I have for this year is 55%, which sort of averages the last 2 years out to 63% were on multi-lane roadways. And then for speed, I think it's also a lower number. Oh, nighttime is, for this year, is overall 88%. I think I didn't do a number for this year. And then for speed, hang on, almost there. Speed overall for the last 2 years is 50%. And for this year, it's 45%. Okay. So it's the numbers are coming down, I think, as we get through more 2017 crashes. And probably they'll even out over time, would be my guess.
Okay. Terry, do you have any thoughts on any of this? I know you're not thinking about these statistically necessarily, but.
No, I'm not sure. Did we just do stats on the vehicles we did do on any other roadway users? All those stats were just vehicle stats.
Sorry, could you say that again?
I must have missed something because all those stats were vehicle stats, correct? Wait, do we do stats on any other roadway users? Like, did we
these
do
are
a pedestrian
Yeah.
violation, bicycle? We only did one stat for vehicles.
yeah, these are the
No.
findings from last year, yeah.
Well, I mean, most
what-
of the
Okay.
the findings from last year were not, except for impairment and speeding, we didn't, I don't think we made findings on, you know, how many other kinds of violations were committed by people. Most of the
Well, I
findings,
think that I think we mislead everybody of everything if we don't do across the board all the stats. We're only doing
No.
vehicle stats.
well, you know, you didn't let me finish. The last finding is about pedestrians. But, you know, we didn't make we had two parts to the report. One are the big findings, and the other ones are in the appendix where we did put all of the factors for every crash into the scheme of things. But if we don't have big numbers, then we haven't been including every finding. And you know, you guys were okay with what we did last year, so. I don't know. I mean, you know.
Terry, one other thing we're going to talk about today is serious injuries. I think sometimes due to the severity of the crashes, at least that we've reviewed since I came on, I feel like sometimes we don't know as much about the pedestrian action. At least that's something I've heard before. And one of the things that we're going to talk about a little later is adding serious injury crashes, just statistics about them to the report, just like I said, to add a little depth. And that might be a space where we can talk a little bit about where exactly pedestrian crashes are occurring. Like one thing that I know George Branyan has said is that like the many or a majority of pedestrian crashes that are at an intersection happen during right on green. And you know, just things like that I think are helpful to understand like some of the patterns that are occurring. And unfortunately, he couldn't be on right now because he has a conflict, but Derek Boyd's going to be on and talk a little bit about some of the stats that they are pulling together on serious injuries. Actually, one of his big complaints is that the reporting doesn't, he's having trouble pulling the pedestrian action out of reports recently. I mean, this is a separate issue, but I'm not sure how much we've talked about that in this, but we could think about it. All right, go ahead, John.
I was just gonna say to Terry, I guess, but to everyone that the eight findings in last year's report are they're only based on the crashes we reviewed, so it's not you know, so much a summary of like only the violations of motor vehicle operators or something like that. It's kind of just limited to what happened in those crashes that we reviewed in the first year of the task force. So I think the themes that you know are mentioned, some of them are about the roadway itself, some are about you know, like Eileen said, like impairment or speeding, but I guess they're certainly not intended to only focus on one roadway user.
Yeah, and I go back to Vision Zero is about people make mistakes and we look at the larger system. We also last year didn't have I don't think we had enough. We only had 5 pedestrian bicyclist crashes. And so we would have been and that's all of them. So we would have been having like, okay, 2 of 3 2 pedestrians were at fault. 1 bicyclist was at fault. I'm trying to, I just don't think the numbers at that point were big enough to do it. Whether they will be this year is a separate question. I haven't got to that point. The only other thing I'll say is that one of the things that did jump out at me this year is that a lot of the cars involved in these crashes are old. That was not something I focused on last year, so I've been playing with that a bit because that can raise issues about like headlight performance would be a big issue that the NTSB and AAA actually have pointed out as potential issues when a car gets old, that the headlights stop functioning well. So like I said, I've just been playing with that in Finding Two in the darkness issue, with the darkness issue, headlights and lighting overall.
All right, Carrie, any response to all that? I know it's hard when you're on mute. I'm just giving you
I'm
a second.
sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Oh, I just want to see if you had any response to all that, because
No, I'm okay. I just want to make sure that we present everything, all the information. That's all. And I'm not trying to start anything. I'm just saying everything I hear is just one on the vehicle. But and maybe I don't know all the numbers, but what we see here at Major Crash, it seems that it's closer to in the middle of the contributing factors of like of a pedestrian and car violations. It seems like our numbers are, and I don't have them at 50-50, but they're closer to 50-50 than not. So
yeah,
I think I
I
just want to make sure that I care about this way more than I think people realize. And I truly don't want to mislead anybody out there of the importance of all roadway users being safe on the streets. Everybody can contribute to a safer roadway. And that's all I want to do, is make sure that because if one person, it doesn't matter which roadway user you are, if you took that extra step to be safe, we're going to save lives. So we cannot be one-sided on anything, or we could end up harming somebody out there. And that's my only point. All roadway users need to take responsibility of being safe, and that can save lives.
Right. I'm just pulling up, just pulled up a chart. So we have some information about pedestrian location. I don't think that I was able to pull up. Anyway, we'll like I said, we'll pull together some additional kind of statistical basis, I think, for this year's crash report or major crash task force report that hopefully will give us a little more depth beyond just some of the limitations of the cases that we're able to review during our meetings. So should allow us to get into some other things. So I'm just going to quickly kind of go through the recommendations from last year. I don't honestly think that we should necessarily, we can talk about any individual ones if you think that there's right for discussion, but I'd also like to just send these around and have people kind of think about them and maybe send some emails with thoughts if you want to add to it. So this is like my very brief summary of each recommendation. Obviously the link Jonathan sent out has the whole report and I think there's roughly a paragraph on each one of the recommendations with a little more detail. So I just urge you to take a look at that. So I'm just going to go through these summaries. The first recommendation was to continue our high crash site visits and improve short and long-term response. And to ensure that the design can handle daytime transportation needs while discouraging reckless driving behaviors at night. I think in terms of our site visits, especially post-fatal crash, I think we've really upped our game on that and continued a lot of our other responses, certainly at DDOT. And I know MPD has helped out a lot with that whole process, which I appreciate quite a bit. The second recommendation was to identify federal or local barriers to redesign safer streets and review recent research on speed and impairment related crashes and improve effectiveness of the ignition interlock program. I can't really speak to the last one, but the other two I think we've made progress on. And the ignition interlock, I guess, is a complex issue, but we can think about whether we should reiterate that this year or do something else. Sorry, go ahead.
Linda, the Vision Zero bill, the one that's pending and is coming up for a second vote in the fall, it does tighten up the program.
Great.
There's that, and maybe DMV can, I think, had the lead on that, so maybe they can, help to put something together. There may be other things that need to be done, but we'll see.
Okay. Yeah, Bridget is not on the phone, unfortunately, so she's listening, and she says that it's an ongoing project at this time, the Ignition Interlock D. Actually, I don't know what D stands for. IID is an ongoing project.
Device.
Ignition Interlock device. Okay, yeah. Great. So the other question is, I guess, for the report this year, shall we give an update on where we were, or say, we could basically say in progress or done, or like any changes or updates to the recommendations from last year? Recommendation 3, review histories of drivers and vehicles involved in fatal and critical injury crashes since 2016 and assess the district's approach to these drivers. Not sure what the update is on that, but we can look into that as part of our vision or our new report. Recommendation 4, improve crash data by including unknown as a category under impairment and speed, and revise analyses internally and online to accurately gauge effects of impairment and speed based on revised data. I think that's more kind of a data quality, nature question. And maybe this isn't a question for you, Terry, but it'd be great to talk at some point about how the impairment and speed are recorded for the FARS database versus locally, if it's all the same. Just a question we don't have to figure it out right now. But a question for later.
I'll look into that. I think it's the same, but I'll double check it with our FARS people.
Okay. Recommendation 5 is to review fatal and critical injury crashes for patterns and causality. Speed up internal review at DDOT prior to cases closing. That, I guess, is the big thing that we've done a lot with this year, and Charlie's on, who has done tons and tons of work on that, which has been great, and respond with engineering changes where possible. So this is something we've definitely pushed forward strongly with Charlie's work on that. Charlie, maybe one thing for this year's report you can think about is what we would recommend is kind of, will we note like done, or is there anything we want to tweak about the recommendation and make a new one? And finally, for recommendation 6, include DMV in all task force meetings. Thank you, Bridget, for being on. Invite as needed, Office of Attorney General. We just did that, although I think not for the purpose conceptualized in this recommendation. Office of Disability Rights, Age-Friendly DC Task Force, and Office of the Chief Medical Examiner. I don't think we've included any of the other groups on this. Maybe that's something we can consider for this year, where we want to keep that recommendation or amend it, or move forward with it, since we haven't really moved on that specific inclusion as part of this group. Is there any of that people want to revisit and talk about right now, or do we want to just wait and maybe we can set up some way for people to, we can just kind of have an email conversation, or we can just solicit edits or not edits, comments on each one of these via email that can just come to myself and Eileen probably.
Yeah, it's Eileen. I think having an email discussion could be good. The idea behind this last year was that we started to talk about something that I think we should talk about more, which is how we organize our crash reviews. So, what we had in mind was, if we did a number of impairment-related crashes, which are crashes where the OAG's office might have handled previous cases involving the same driver, we could get a better idea of, where the driver has a history. What is it that happened? That, how did the system fail in this driver ending up back on the road? And with ODR, the idea was if we had cases, if we came across cases involving people with disabilities, then we would bring them in to discuss those cases with us. The same thing with age friendly. And I think OCME, maybe that was, I don't remember what we had in mind there. Maybe Jonathan does.
Yeah, I
But,
think it's
but that
same.
requires us to kind of think ahead and to plan our reviews so that we're not, finding out the day before what we're reviewing. And I'm not sure that's workable. So email discussion may be the best way.
Yeah, okay, so we'll, maybe the easiest thing to do is I'll just copy and paste all of the recommendations out of the previous year's report and just send them around as an email, and people can just, as I said, just send myself, Eileen, and Jonathan comments. You can make them kind of right after each one or at the top, whichever works best for you. I think we want to try and push forward with this revision hopefully in the next few weeks. So if you could get on that and get back to us, we'll give a deadline probably a couple weeks or a week before our next meeting so we can review revisions at that meeting. So if you just take some time to put some attention on it. I'm just gonna pull up the actual report now. The other piece I wanted to walk through, and Terry, I know you're on the phone, but are you able to kind of look at the document online?
Yes, I can get to a computer.
I think I wanted to go over this because we kind of had this discussion of Appendix 4, which starts on, it says page 33 on here. Yes, page 33 of the document. I want to go over this. So this is the way that crashes were written up last year based on the information that we reviewed in the closed session, and then this was the public output, so to speak, of that. And I know we had a lot of kind of back and forth about what is in the closed session, what we do with that. This is one of the things we do with that. Obviously, it comes out much later than the session happens, but it is the public document. And so I just wanted to make sure, Terry, that you kind of look at this and think about what, if anything, you want to tweak about this type of presentation for this year's. And obviously for this year's, we'll, I guess my thought is that we could include all of these 2017 crashes also as an appendix, a separate appendix. I haven't thought about that yet, but we just want to make sure that the write-up makes sense for what we've been talking about. I don't think any of this is non-open or public data, but it is, again, I think based on, it reflects the discussion or something. Actually, how would you describe, Eileen, you really drafted these. How would you describe its relationship to like the crash memo versus the press release versus?
Well, almost all of it is drawn from press release and other public information I can find. And then, it's teeny tiny on my screen, so.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. And then the contributing factors do come from our discussions generally, because as I talked about last month, usually open data is wrong about a lot of the contributing factors. It's just inaccurate, so we had to rely on the discussion. Things like weather and lighting, I usually try to use the public sources, but I think there have been a few times when I had to use what MPD said in the meeting. And then the history of crashes, I tried to pull that from open data. So it's, mostly it's 90% of it is public, and, maybe 10% of it is factual information from our discussions, not, as I recall, and but I don't want to, I'm like 99% sure none of it is the police officer's opinion, educated opinion. It's, what they described as factual. To me, the role that this plays is it's a way for us to capture the smaller issues that aren't big enough to put into the major findings. And it's also, there is, an interest in what were the causes of these crashes amongst the advocates and other people. And when MPD puts out the press release, they rightly say it's still under investigation, so it doesn't have all of the information. And I really want there to be something out there about each of the crashes that tells people, here's the results of the investigation, and here's what the task force looked at as other potential factors, and the issues we looked at.
So
That's
again,
the basic.
I don't think we really have to have a discussion about this at this point. I just wanted to highlight this to look out for our report that we'll be putting out in the coming months, and make sure we're all still happy with this format and the level of information in there. I think I don't know how many people, like, frankly, read Appendix 4 of our report last year. Not to downplay it, but it is, I think, good to show what information we use to formulate our findings and our recommendations. So whatever format that takes. So just everybody, please take a look at it. And again, send any feedback to myself, Eileen, and Jonathan, and we'll be trying to put this together for this year.
Yeah,
any discussion or comments while we are on, despite me not inviting it particularly right now?
Not on this. I have one more thing to say before we move on to the serious injuries presentation.
Sorry, what was that, Eileen?
I want to say one more thing before we move on to the serious injuries presentation, but if other people want to comment on this, they should do that first. It's not really about this. It's about the report, but not about the appendix.
Anyone else want to comment or questions? Okay, Eileen, dive in.
So on the Dropbox and on, I think, Linda's Google Drive, there is a spreadsheet with all of the information on the crash, data on the crashes so far that we've reviewed. And so I'd encourage people to look at that and your own notes. And if there are additional findings you want to present, think about doing that. I'm working on the draft, and I'll be pulling some things from the data, but everybody should take a glance at it and see what you think. And I can send the Dropbox links, and maybe Linda can send the the Google Drive link. That I think that document is the same on both. The report, Linda, we've been having the issues with me being able to upload the report to the Google Drive, and it looks like I probably can't. So I've been updating it on the Dropbox.
Okay, we'll somehow get on the same drive.
Yeah.
Okay. But let's just take comments on email, I think, for right now, and then previous findings, which I'll just send them around in email so they're easy for everyone to access and comment on. We'll figure out if anybody wants to do actual drafting or write proposed texts, definitely feel free. All right. Hearing no other ones, does anybody have another comment or question? I think I'll have Derek, I see you're on, and Leon. Thanks for joining us. I know you guys had a conflict earlier. Derek, are you prepared to give us a kind of a brief overview of what we might be able to add to the report regarding serious injury crashes?
So, Linda, does this refer back to the questions that we answered in email in terms of kind of bringing the stats from the major crash review reporting up against the stats of the overall kind of body of crash data?
That I already talked about. I know we kind of went back and forth about the serious injury stuff. If you want to push that, we can, but we're hoping you could talk a little bit about that. The serious injury report you're contracted with?
Right. Yeah. Oh, okay. Okay. I was confused. Yes. No. I'm certainly prepared to talk about the serious injury review that we did, as well as the fatal data review. So give me a moment to get my screen shared. All right. Can everybody see the PowerPoint?
Yes.
Yep.
Excellent.
Okay.
All right. So just briefly, maybe the middle part of last year, and just in an interest to kind of answer some general questions that we had on what's happening in our suspected serious injury crashes, we performed a in-depth study of all serious injury crash data or all serious injury crashes that occurred in 2018. We then expanded that this year to include 2019. And then we did a comparison against our fatalities. And the hope there was to kind of answer the question of, are our serious injury crashes essentially potential fatalities where just, one or two things didn't happen that would have tipped them over the balance? And do that body of crashes look the same, right? Do we see the same sort of patterns in our fatals that we see in our serious injury crashes? And in terms of why we were doing that is, of course, we have lots of different efforts underway at DDOT. We want to make sure that we're incorporating safety into all of those efforts. And in order to do that, we have to understand what our most critical cases look like from a crash standpoint. And so those are, of course, our suspected serious injury and our fatal crashes. So as I mentioned, the data that I'm going to present to you for the next couple of minutes involves fatal crashes, the entirety of fatal crashes from 2016 to 2019, and the entirety of suspected serious injury from 2018 through 2019. In terms of the number of crashes that were included in this review, for fatalities over that 16 to 19 period, there were 116. For suspected serious injury, there were 604. The asterisk on that number for suspected serious is that, again, as I mentioned, we did a record level review on these crashes. And so in the case of some of them, we did remove some records that we thought were not pertinent to the study because they did not indicate serious injury, nor did they indicate transporting to the hospital, or in some cases, they perhaps indicated that there were no complaints of injury. So we wanted to make sure we were focusing just on the ones that were essentially verifiable, again, based on the PD10 record. And in the case of the fatalities, we also used the major crash review memos or investigation memos to inform any additional information that might be missing from those. And so I'm just going to walk you through some of kind of our initial findings. This is very much a work in progress. So just taking a look at our suspected serious injury, again, we have about 300 of these a year. When we look at the crash categories in terms of the types of users that are involved in these crashes, pedestrians are way out front on this at 185. Then we have multi-vehicle and bicycle and motorcycle that are right there in the top. As you can see, when we account for vulnerable road users within this population, that being peds, bikes, motorcycles, scooters, e-scooters, etc., that makes up about 51% of the crashes, suspected serious injury crashes that we're seeing annually, versus vehicle occupants making up the other 49%. When we compare that to fatalities, we see that the pedestrian matter holds true with peds at the top of our list, as does the vulnerable user kind of overrepresentation in the data. We see that vulnerable users account for 56% of our fatal crashes, as compared to vehicle occupants at the other 44%. When we look at time of day, we see some interesting patterns emerging, especially as it relates to suspected serious injury in comparison to fatality. So what we see is that in suspected serious injury, the majority of those crashes are occurring in the afternoon hours. And what I'm not going to get into here is kind of the breakdown of how that occurs, but I will share that we see a particular focus basically between 4 and 6 p.m. with some variability moving towards 8 p.m. around suspected serious injury, which does not follow the trend that is in place when it comes to fatalities, where we see the overnight hours, 9 p.m. to 3 a.m., as leading that group. So right away, we're seeing kind of the divergence between these incidents. When we look at light condition, I'm sorry, I've got some sort of glitch in my PowerPoint here. I should have two. Let me move. When we look at crashes by light condition, and let me bump out of this and see if I can get the actual slide to show. I hope everybody can see that. When we're comparing fatality to suspected serious injury here, we see that we have an nearly equal split between crashes occurring that are suspected serious injury between at times when it's dark versus times when it is daylight. However, fatals, not surprisingly, as we saw on the previous slide, were kind of the largest temporal number was in that 9 p.m. to 3 a.m. band. And so, of course, we see that bearing out as 70% of our fatalities in that study period occurred when it was dark outside. When we look at crashes by the day of week, we've got pretty even distribution here, of course, with some drops on the weekends, with the exception of suspected serious injury does somewhat hold on weekends. Moving on to roadway functional class, perhaps unsurprisingly, our suspected serious injury crashes are focused around our arterials. However, there is some small divergence when you look at our fatality data, in that really our principal arterials kind of edge out our minor arterials by a little bit, where you see a little bit more parity between the minor and principal arterials on suspected serious injury. Looking at our geographic distribution, we have fatalities here on the left, suspected serious injury on the right in green. You can see that from a geographic perspective, we also have a point of divergence between our suspected serious injury and our fatality. Our fatalities tend to be overrepresented, or at least the majority of them to occur in wards 8, 5, and 7, whereas our suspected serious injuries are led by ward 6, followed by ward 2. And as you jump into the bicycle and ped data, I think that becomes a little bit more obvious as to why we're seeing that. Although we do need to do some further analysis on that. So just jumping into specifically pedestrians and what we're seeing with pedestrians. In terms of suspected serious injury, we're seeing quite a bit of it occurring along our principal and minor arterials. That tracks alongside with our fatality data, although you can see again principal arterials or fatalities rather skewing towards our principal arterials. When we look at those crash types about what's going on when the ped is struck, we have vehicle going straight at the intersection leading our serious injury, or rather suspected serious injury data set, whereas mid-block pedestrian crashes lead our fatality data. So a little bit of divergence, of course, vehicle going straight, not at intersection, is also our number 2 in suspected serious injury. So we have a lot of characteristics in common between those two items. And then just moving into suspected serious injuries by primary contributing circumstances. Failure to yield right-of-way leading the group. Unfortunately, so is unknown. And this kind of speaks to some of the, I think, challenges that we have in interpreting the data that we're working with. You know, this is, we certainly, we're not faulting this as a data issue. It's just an item that we know that we need to work around, and that's why we do the detail level review at this level. However, so as working down the list, crossing mid-block is our number 3. Number 4, driver failing to yield to the pedestrian, and then peds crossing against signals, or entering the roadway at an unexpected location, perhaps, also up there. As we kind of get into these finer grain matters, this data I think is a little less reliable in terms of an overall takeaway, but nonetheless, I think interesting to share when we're starting to target solutions related to pedestrian fatalities and suspected serious injuries. So moving over to fatalities, we can see that again the crossing not at intersection leading the group, as well as other unknown up there, drivers failing to yield, and then intoxication, and then unexpected entry points. So very similar to what we're seeing in suspected serious injury, although, well, I guess I'll just leave it at that. So again, these are just our initial findings. This is an ongoing effort. We've heard a lot of internal feedback on some ideas as to how to further splice the data, but I think the largest takeaway here is that we're dealing with two very unique matters when it relating to suspected serious injury crashes versus fatalities. They don't follow the same patterns temporally or geographically. We're seeing again, kind of top level, our suspected serious injuries tend to occur in wards 2 and 6. They tend to occur during the PM rush during weekdays, whereas our fatalities more often than not tend to occur overnight and particularly oriented towards the weekends. Another finding, of course, the record level review is incredibly important. This is something we'd like to expand out to all of our ped and bike crashes. We have some initiatives that we've discussed with the University of Florida that's developing a tool that may potentially come to bear that we can use to quickly basically reanalyze our crash data and get it into buckets that make it a little bit easier to work with from a back-end data perspective. We're pursuing that effort on the side, so that could potentially inform this report moving forward. In terms of immediate next steps, we need to get into kind of further refinement, kind of as some internal comments have provided us some guidance concerning what's exactly happening with those vulnerable users. So I have some super initial data surrounding bikes, similar to the PED data that just needs a deeper dive before we share that data. But we hope that it will kind of bring to bear some obvious or maybe not obvious, but some potential mitigations that we can bring forward. And then, of course, control against other factors. So one of the comments that we've heard internally on this one was we need to kind of bring together a confluence of factors and see what exactly is happening as it relates to perhaps time of day, intoxication, or combinations of other factors thereof. So perhaps that would be something with bicycles like turning movements combined with time of day, etc. So we have some more work to do, but nonetheless, we've answered some interesting questions, and we've dispelled some myths in the process of going through this level of review on it, and I'm quite excited to kind of be at this point. So that's all I have, Linda.
That was awesome. Thank you very much. I think the deeper dive you did on some of the pedestrian crashes was particularly helpful. We just earlier were talking that I think due partly the fact that we only had looked at 5 pedestrian fatalities before last year's our annual report. We weren't able to make many kind of conclusions based on that. And I think especially the information you were just presenting on the pedestrian stuff would be really helpful to add to that kind of discussion about pedestrian safety in particular. Anyone else have comments or questions?
Of course, I do. First, though, I am seeing in the chat that Amin, who is my alternate, was in a crash, and I think, Terry, he may be trying to call you. But if he doesn't, I'm
sorry, is he in a crash? My phone's blowing up, but I don't know who they are. He's in a crash right now?
Yeah, in the 3rd Street tunnel.
There's a one-way driver in the 3rd Street.
Can you tell him to call, if he's in a crash, he needs to call 911.
No, I think he's already done that. I think he's already done it. Yeah.
And that's just, I want to make sure it's clear. If somebody's in a crash and needs assistance, then they need to call 911.
Yeah. No, he said there's,
Okay.
I think there's an issue with the officer responding. He wanted to talk to someone who knows him. Amin is the Ward 8 rep to the Pedestrian Council.
Okay, but see, one of the things that we're not doing, we can't get involved in it. He needs to go through the first responder officer. I'm not there, so I can't hear his side and not the officer's side.
Okay.
And then I can, after it's done, just tell him to talk to a supervisor on the scene. Ask for a if he disagrees with the officer's finding, he can ask for a supervisor on the scene. Because
Okay.
it's not right for me to do that there at that stage.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
I will do that as soon as I'll just quickly go through my, I have one question. Derek, first, thank you very much. That was a great presentation, much appreciated. I have a couple questions, and then I guess maybe this is more a suggestion. One is, the first question is, what's a serious injury? How do we define that? And then I'll just quickly give you my comments / suggestions. One of the issues that has been coming up a lot recently in reports on pedestrian crashes is the role of SUVs. So I think it'd be worthwhile to look at fatal versus serious injury crashes and involvement of SUVs in those crashes. When the crashes involve pedestrians or bicyclists or scooters, people who would be more vulnerable to the size of the SUV. I guess it's really more a question of size of the vehicle. It's not SUVs in particular, but SUVs have come up a lot. One of the issues I've been looking at in the fatal crashes that we've reviewed is the age of the cars, which can have effects with headlights stop functioning well after about 5 years. So I'd be curious if age of cars in serious injury versus fatal crashes, if there's a difference there. I wasn't sure did we see, if I missed it, just tell me, but did we see a slide comparing impairment and speed and or speed to between fatal and serious injury crashes? And then
You did not. You did not see that, and that's one of the follow-up items.
Yeah. And then the last thing is there have been a slew of reports in the last couple of years from the National Transportation Safety Board, the Insurance Institute, the Governor's Highway Safety Association. I think the most recent one is the Government Accountability Office, all on pedestrian safety crashes. And I'm trying to look at their findings while I work on the report for the task force. And it might also be worthwhile looking at them because they're also bringing up the SUV issue. And I think IIHS has been bringing up issues with the horsepower of the vehicles involved. And anyway, just as a general suggestion, it might be worth looking at those reports. And if you want, I can email you links to them, but I don't want to overwhelm you.
So I think just a couple of responses. I really like the age of vehicle. The other thing that we want to look at is registration, and that kind of relates to another suspicion that we have,
Yes.
not like kind of the prevailing resident versus outsider
Yes,
issue,
it's
but
the
more
Virginia-
the Virginia issue.
Yeah.
And I'm frantically looking for the older version of this presentation because I had a slide on the vehicle type. And what I can't answer for you, I'm not finding it quickly. What I can't answer for you is how those vehicles split on a fleet mix representation in DC. And so that's one of the kind of, I think, compelling pieces of data that we want to know before we present that information. But what I can tell you is that the numbers were passenger cars about 118 in the PED crashes, and SUVs about 40-ish, 43. So SUVs didn't lead the charge, but again, might be overrepresented based on fleet mix. And that's not something I can answer right now.
Right. And it'd be interesting to compare fatals versus serious injury too on that.
Sure.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, Derek, I think you would definitely need to have that mix to make any sort of assertion on those. You know what I mean?
Is it possible to get a vehicle mix for DC?
And that's a good question because again, it's not like we're gonna look to the DMV and say, what's the mix here? Give us the information on registered vehicles, because again, you have Virginia drivers driving in on a daily basis, and those from Maryland and stuff. So I don't know that that is even something that we can get, unless we, I don't know, unless we look at like we do a vehicle classification for every entry point into the district or something to that, and then.
One thing we could look at is I don't know how easy it is to pull this information, but you could look at vehicle mix over time in the crash representation, which doesn't tell you if they're quote unquote overrepresented, but it at least tells you if there's a change. I mean, I think that fundamentally vehicle regulation is a federal, is under the federal jurisdiction. So regardless of what we come up with, it may not be, it probably won't change federal policy per se. And I think the federal level analyses are probably more impactful on that score. But it could be interesting to see just change over time, if we can find it. And do you do that with pulling VIN numbers, Derek, or is it?
Well, right. We do have VINs, and in most cases we have the vehicle type field. I'd need to go back and figure out what the reliability is on that field before we think about it, to figure out what the best way of doing it is. But yeah, we do have VINs, so that's a potential possibility. I think the vehicle mix over time is an interesting consideration. So that's a potential another one.
Bridget says the weight class may be more helpful.
And so that's the weight class is the FHWA standard 13 classification. I suppose. Is that...
Bridget is chatting only today.
Okay.
So she can hear you, but she can't talk. So we'll see what she said. The VIN will decode and provide the weight.
Well, there we go.
Whoa.
So we'll use VIN. That's great to know.
Yeah.
I was actually thinking, I don't know if you all have talked to IAHS, but they are quasi-local, and they probably would be happy to consult on anything in terms of how they have been doing those studies, because they just put another one out last month, actually.
Right. I've put a number of their studies on the Dropbox.
Okay, here, I'll just add this one to the chat. And then the team at NTSB is great. I don't know if you've ever met with them, but I could definitely connect you with them if you want to. Maybe that would be a good conversation to have before we put out the next report also. Ivan Chung was involved in that, and he was really good.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'm happy to take whatever opportunity we have to further refine this and make it a better product. So, and I think there was a question at the beginning of the questions here that I may have overlooked.
Right. What's a serious injury?
Right. So the serious injuries are as defined by MUC, which is there's a outlier that is currently being worked on, but there are, Leon, I'm going to need your assistance here. There are 9 categories of injury that are noted at the scene that end up triggering that determination by the reporting officer. And Terry probably can weigh in a lot better than myself or Leon on this. Leon, can you help me out on those categories?
The entire list, maybe not.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
but yeah, I think you have it right.
It's
there
like
are
severe lacerations, right?
Right. Yeah.
Bleeding from the head. But to answer the question directly, we're working with the data that has already been classified by MPD. So we're not making the call on this being a suspected serious injury. Right.
Okay.
Yeah, and we do have a kind of a map of what they are, but it's meant to align with the MMUCC, the MUC definition of serious injury.
Okay.
That helps, and that's available on NHTSA's website.
Right. Yeah.
And it's the 4th edition version of that document that I believe is in use. Is that correct, Leon?
Yeah, that we are using. I think they have a 5th edition.
Yeah.
And we'll
That's why I
transition to
pointed
that.
that out, because I think there's
Yeah.
some stuff, yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
and the mention of the muck reminded me of another thing. I suspect this isn't possible to do, but there was a report maybe 3 or 4 years ago from Georgetown, it was national level, and it talked about how people with disabilities, especially wheelchair users, play a disproportionate role in pedestrian fatalities. And so far, what I'm seeing in the task force is that does not seem to be the case. We have a lot of older pedestrians, but the only disability they have is what comes with age. So is that possible? Last I looked at the MUCCC, the MMUC, the MUC, they weren't accounting for that. It wasn't there wasn't any question in it about whether or not someone had a disability.
That's,
Yeah, which
that's,
the last round for the MUC, I commented about that. So I'm guessing you probably can't do it, but that might be worth looking at too.
I need to find out where and if that is coded. That's not something that I can answer off the top of my head.
Yeah. That's a suggestion.
I just got off the phone with him. He's okay.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think it's 7, Derek, not 9. I thought so as well. Unconsciousness, paralysis, significant burns, broken or distorted extremities, crush injuries, severe lacerations, skull, chest, or abdominal injuries. I think those are the 7. I think we were missing crush injuries at one point in time. I think we have updated that, and so forth and so on. But I have a question for Eileen. You mentioned something about headlights not working well after 5 years. Tell me about that, because my car is greater. It's older than 5 years. Now you have me worried.
I will, Leon, so there's 2 issues that have come up with headlights. One was in the NTSB pedestrian safety report from a couple of years ago, and that has to do generally with headlight function. Overall, no matter how old the car, and that IIHS started evaluating headlights in 2016, and they basically said all headlights suck, and now they're starting to improve. But the other issue that came up, and this is actually from AAA put out a bulletin about this, it was how I found out about it, is that if the headlights are more than like 5 to 7 years old, they start becoming more opaque. And the light deteriorates. So I probably exaggerate by saying they're no good. It depends on how good the headlight was in the first place and exactly how old the car is. But I can certainly forward you the report that I saw.
So are you talking about the surface of the headlight deteriorating and stuff? Because some get easy as well.
This is the
Derek has experience with this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So like, and you can have your headlights upgraded. Have parts of them replaced. It's an expensive process, apparently. But I brought this up earlier, I think, before you guys were on, because when I was trying to finding number 2 last year was about how we have this disproportionate share of crashes after dark. And so Che was perplexed by that finding, because I think she was kind of like, well, of course you would have more crashes after dark. Why do you make this a separate finding? And I was looking for things that might impact that beyond the people go faster, the roads are emptier, and we have more impairment after dark. And so I started thinking about headlights, and I looked at all the crashes. It's like really vast majority of crashes involve cars that are very old, that are old, like 10 to 20 years old. And most of them are more than 5 years old. I think there were only a few that were only 3 to 4 years old. So I'm working on you can never prove that an individual car's headlights had deteriorated and it was a factor. So all I can say is, well, it might be, but it's enough to make me sort of suspicious that this is less a factor than speed or impairment, but a factor. Do you want me to send you the AAA thing?
Oh yeah, why
Okay.
not? I'll take a look.
So
Just get more information.
Anybody else want to see it?
One-
Should I send it to the group?
one very concrete question for you, Derek. So I know that this is kind of a work in progress, but what's the best way for us to kind of integrate some of these findings potentially into the annual report, which we're hoping to be drafting? I don't have an exact timeline, but soon, sooner the better.
Well, we are drafting it.
Yes, we are drafting it.
It's a slow
I just
process.
maybe want to finalize it sooner
Yeah.
than later. Yes.
I mean, so at this point, we have high level takeaways. If we're so the findings that I previously saw were much more nuanced than our high level takeaways are here. But I mean, I guess I'm happy to provide what we can in response, like to provide a context for those findings. That's, you know, the kind of larger body of crash data that we've reviewed. At least, or rather, serious injury and fatality data that we've reviewed. So I don't know. I guess you all are ahead of us in terms of kind of granularity, and so I don't think that they'll just align perfectly. So I think maybe if you advance the findings along, we can see what sort of context we can provide, and then as this effort becomes a little bit more granular and more advanced, then maybe a lot of those findings will line up on those points. I think, you know, we certainly got some great feedback here of considerations, you know, relating to both age of car versus SUV, using the VINs. So yeah, I mean, all of this feedback is going to make this a more complete product. But I think until we get there, I'm happy to offer what we can, just kind of on an ad hoc basis.
Okay. And so in terms of your process, will this be a public document at some point?
I don't know that we've completely thought that through at this point, as it's still a rather initial document. I guess my hope was that we could use it to dispel some myths, as I mentioned earlier. I don't know that the document needs to be public for that to be the case, but I'm open to further discussion on what the agency would like to do with it.
Okay. So I think next steps, we'll send around the findings and recommendations from last year for people to comment on. I think Eileen, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that in terms of just tallying how many crashes did we review and how do they play into all these categories, you're still kind of finalizing that?
Yeah, I'm still working through it. What I'm doing is starting with the findings from last year,
Right.
and running the numbers on that. And then when as I go through, if I note an issue like the headlights issue, I try to integrate that into the finding. And then there may be separate findings. You know, like last year we didn't have enough crashes to raise the SUV issue. This year I'm going to look to see if we do, in the context of the pedestrian finding, but I haven't got to that point yet. I'm still actually working through the speed finding.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But I could definitely see how Derek's results we could integrate, you know, like a paragraph of, say, in comparison to the statistical information we have about serious injury crashes, fatal crashes seem to be more likely to involve this factor versus something like that.
Okay. So I guess at this point, just looking at the recommendations in particular, for one thing, we want to update on what, if anything, action we've taken in regards to each recommendation in the annual report, I think. So if y'all can kind of look at those findings and recommendations and make any comments or notes. And again, I'll send that around with the timeline and kind of instructions for sending those back to us so we can kind of continue drafting. And then I guess we'll work over the numbers and make sure we have them all correct for the kind of comparative complete, quote unquote, complete picture, meaning all fatalities in the district that are put in through the fire system. Just as a comparison, because obviously we don't have the in-depth information on each of those crashes, but at least we have some basics that we can compare them to. Anyway, so we'll put those together to put in the report and bring it back to the group. I think next month we should probably return to reviewing crashes. Terry, are you all kind of ready to do the next batch, or what's the best way to proceed with that?
I apologize. Repeat that question one more time.
Oh, I was just wondering if at the next meeting, at the end of August, if you'll be ready to present additional crashes or.
Absolutely.
Okay, great.
Well, we're prepared. I think me and Jonathan had spoke earlier that the next meeting we go back to presenting crashes.
Okay, great. Sounds good. Jonathan, anything else you want to get to before we adjourn?
Nope. If anybody else has anything, let us know, or else someone can motion to adjourn the meeting.
I'll make that motion. Kristen.
Kristen, okay.
Seconded, Eileen.
Okay. And we'll just do the roll call vote. MPD, Terry Thorne.
Yes, sir. Copy. What am I supposed to say? Yes.
Yep, that works. D-Dot, Linda Bailey.
Yes. Aye.
D-Dot, Leon
Aye.
Hanson, if you're still there.
I'm here. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Office of Planning, Kristen Calkins.
Yes.
Pedestrian Advisory Council, Eileen McCarthy.
Yes.
And then Multimodal Accessibility Advisory Council, Helen Urquhart.
Yes.
Okay, that is a unanimous approval. So the meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.